Hello, Regina.
Hello?
Hi. So we have you on the line again. You can hear me all
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, fine. So this is Bam Like the Ghost, and we have Regina Fae, the UK singer-songwriter. We have her on for the second time in support of your new projects, which part one is out right now called Lie to You. And then
Yes.
on July 3rd, you have Getting Over You.
Yes.
So I was reading on your Instagram that you've taken this time in quarantine to work on orchestral music, and that's what these part one and part two are using your new orchestral style of recording.
Yes. Part one was actually produced by Georgina Agomba, who also produced Kaleidoscope, but two, three, and four are all produced by me.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's because of the result of the COVID quarantine you weren't able to get. Was it planned to still use your previous producer, or was the plan to kind of do it yourself?
I wanted to try out how it would be if I did it myself, and I just figured this would be a good song to try it with. And I liked how it turned out, so I've gone ahead and done the rest as well.
So we previously interviewed you, and we got into the fact that you're a singer songwriter. You mix folk, country, classical, and pop, and now you're kind
Yes.
of doubling down on a more like classical orchestral side. Um,
Yep.
so so when did you start? How soon did you start working on this new idea? Or was this something that you were already working on, and then COVID happened, and you decided to like focus on it?
So the songs I'd written quite a while ago, I just hadn't figured out how I should go about the production. And when COVID happened, I just figured, well, I have the extra time, so I may as well just learn a new skill. So I tried it, and now they're, yeah.
So your orchestral, how are you getting this music to be produced? Are you doing it all within like a DAW, or you're using like hardware synths to work it out? How are you actually arranging that?
I'm using Logic, so they're all software instruments. I usually use the keyboard to write them.
So you're using a MIDI controller.
Yeah.
What particular MIDI controller do you use? Did you have to find one that was more expressive to do the classical work, or did you were able to use what you already had?
I just used what I already had, and sometimes I just used my computer's own keyboard because I can always rearrange it after it's recorded when it's MIDI.
So for orchestral music, do you have to do a lot of like production work to like get the little micro details in in how the instruments are played, or you're able to get that through like there's some new types of MIDI that allow you to be more expressive, but do you or have to like code that through the DAW?
I usually just do it through the door so I can adjust different velocity, the strength, the style. So for violins, for example, it can be staccato or legato. I can all do that on the computer
Yeah,
afterwards.
because there's like some new types of MIDI that are coming to the forefront that
Hmm.
it's beyond like MIDI 2. It's like more expressive type of keyboards that bring back this idea of polyphonic aftertouch,
Hmm.
which in the future, but one of the synths that actually had it in the past was the famous Dream machine from Yamaha that Stevie Wonder used on songs in the Key of Life, and it actually was a fully analog polyphonic synth that had polyphonic aftertouch, which
Hmm.
allowed you to kind of you could shake the keys to get vibrato. You
Hmm.
could press them at different strengths and get full kind of expression, like it's almost like an acoustic instrument. But it's very expensive to do. I mean, that machine was like a $200,000 machine.
Oh, wow.
So there's not a lot of synths that can do that. There's some synths that are
Mhm.
starting to bring it back, but it makes your synth go from being like under $1,000 to being like 4 or 5 or 8 thousand dollars to be able to do it. But it's really cool, if you get in a studio that ever has one of these, because it allows you to really, express yourself. When you're trying to mimic other instruments, the fact that you can shake the key to get vibrato or do other things that you wouldn't normally be able to do with a normal keyboard. But you found a way to do it through the software, so that's interesting. So maybe talk more about how you constructed this whole set of songs. You said there's like multiple parts. There's up to how many parts in total?
There are 4 parts in total.
So each one will come out as a single.
Yes.
Are you going to put them all together as an EP?
So I've been treating them almost as if they're volumes in a book series. So they all follow the same story, but I feel like they're also singles within their own right.
So there's no plan to actually put them together as a compilation of all 4?
As a playlist, but not as an EP.
Not as an EP. Kind of stand on their own. That's interesting because sometimes if you do a project like that, maybe you want to feel the full, complete voice, but people can't playlist things together and then get to that point anyway. So maybe kind of talk about how each part. Well, you've got parts that aren't coming out yet, but parts 1 and 2, or 2 comes out on the 3rd, 1 is out now. Maybe talk about the story behind it.
So the story behind the whole series, I think, is something probably everyone has gone through at some point. So this was before I was out of the closet, and I really liked this girl, but I couldn't say anything about it. And eventually we became friends. I was working up the courage to talk to her, to say something, but so much was happening at the time with uni and life and work, and eventually we drifted apart. I found out through someone else that she was dating someone, and for a while I didn't know what to feel, but then it all just came at me at once. I was, yeah, I was hurt, but it was mostly just I was angry at myself that I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
So
That's a
I,
hard feeling. I think a lot of singer songwriters over the years have kind of expressed that feeling. And some of their best songs are about like that kind of heartache when you don't tell the truth to the person that you love and how that comes out. I
yeah.
think that's like a real like a singer songwriter focus because it's like it gets to the heart of something that I think you can draw into that pain and then
Mhm.
relay it in different. Every songwriter relays it a different way, but it's a universal like understood feeling
Yeah.
that you can tap into, and it has a lot of power in the art that comes out of it. From my experience, at least listening to people who have used that kind of theme.
Mhm.
So that is that so lie to you, is that like the first piece of this suite to kind of get into that? That's is it sequentially going in order the story, or does it kind of merge? Does it matter where you start with your suite?
So, like I said, they can all stand on their own as a different emotion. But what I felt when I was writing them is I wrote Lie to You first, and then I thought, that's it, I'm over these feelings. But then I actually realized that when you're going through something like that, you have multiple feelings and different phases and different stages that you go through. So the other 3 songs were also following on that feeling. So Lie to You was mostly regret and just anger. And then Getting Over You is a lot more sad, but it also has that kind of calmness and the acceptance in it. And then finally it'll all come together.
So is getting over you? Is it sometimes when people say getting over you, that at the end of the day, you'll find out what they really didn't get over you. So the song "Getting Over You" kind of um, complete that thought, or does it kind of admit that maybe you never got over them, or do you finally get to a point where you kind of reconcile it?
It's quite funny because I wrote it because I was, on one hand, I was accepting things as they were. On the other hand, I was still aware that I had some time and some work to do before I could actually get over this person. So that's what that conflict is what that song came out of.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a couple of songs that address that in my catalog, and I always end up being like, well, you know what, I really never got over that person. Because I have this one central theme in my music that kind of goes into this like lost love I had like when I was in my 20s and I'm in my 50s, right? So he's like, well, you know, you're not over that yet, and I was like, I guess not. But I kind of use it all the time. It just always comes back into my music. And I just kind of came to the realization that, like, well, I guess I never really got over this person because I keep on writing songs. But it just like sometimes you just like you think you got over them, and then something comes back, you know, memory wash, and then boom, it comes right back. So I totally can get into that. So I'm looking forward to listening to that on July 3rd. So again, like, how long did it take to you to derive these songs? Did they kind of flow out of you, or did you have to really work hard because of the orchestral nature of them?
Writing them was quite fast. Like I wrote Lie to You within a few hours because I just had to get it out right that moment. And Getting Over You, similarly, I wrote it out in one page, just wanting to get the words out. I didn't even think about the melody when I was writing it. But I feel like the production side of it definitely took more time, but it was also much more fun because I got to actually think about every single detail, every single note, and what feeling those would give every single instrument.
So were you still thinking of like in the themes for this you had talked about previously in our last interview, is you're bringing like your medieval studies into your music? Do you're trying to bring some of that? So is that some of what you're doing, or are you moving in a different direction? Like in terms of classical composition, who are the reference points for this particular this project?
I find I take a lot of inspiration from musical theatre in particular because it's all about telling a story in musical theatre, and they also have these great orchestras that just add so much to the feeling of the songs, and I think that's what I was drawing on mostly for these.
Oh, so like the kind of theatrical, like a
Yeah.
Broadway, or like more, what type of theater?
Like, so I especially like Fiddler on the Roof, for example,
Okay,
because
yeah.
it has such a beautiful soundtrack with a lot of violins, obviously because of the name. And I wanted to focus on the string section because that's what I played, so that's what I was most knowledgeable about.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think of like a lot of strings I listen to go back to well, I like Beethoven, I like Bach, but a lot of
Mm.
times I'll go back and listen to progressive rock bands that try to synthesize strings. Like Keith Emerson. I'll go back, listening to like what Yes used to do, and it's kind of interesting because it's not exactly classical. I mean, they're classically trained, but they're kind of taking
Mm-hmm.
it in a different direction. I mean, you hear classical, concepts in progressive rock,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times it's synthesized violins. It's not real violins. Um, Maybe if you listen to a band like Pink Floyd, you start to hear even more orchestral stuff. But yeah, I've always been
Mm-hmm.
kind of drawn into a kind of between progressive and jazz fusion, trying to bring in sounds in that vein. So it's interesting you're coming from a theatrical aspect, which I guess would maybe if you go back listen to like the big bands and like Frank Sinatra, you could hear a lot of strings and that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting too, because sometimes I do like lately I've been listening to a lot of Sinatra, a lot of big bands from the 50s and the
Mm-hmm.
40s, and there's a lot of feeling in that music.
Yeah.
Do you find any particular error in like music that drives you more now in what you listen to? Like if you're going to listen to any kind of error in music, there's any particular error that you're kind of drawn into?
Hmm. I'm. I don't think I listen to a lot of contemporary stuff, but I also like more, like I said, so musical theatre. A lot of pieces that were written a while ago but are still being performed.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So maybe stuff from the 50s and 60s that's
yeah.
still being the loud theater is all based from that time period. or even earlier in 40s and stuff. But yeah, so I kind of get drawn into certain focus lately, like the big bands like the Frank Sinatra, and then I've been really getting heavy into Sun Ra, which is a American jazz band that was kind of predated Miles Davis. I just had more time during the lockdown to kind of dive into their catalog. So I've been using that time to like do a lot of interesting things. But yeah, so you took the time in this coronavirus pandemic to kind of double down on your craft, which is interesting
Yeah.
because most of the musicians I've been talking to have been double down on podcasting. A lot of musicians have been like focusing on, well, I'm going to learn how to engineer my stuff better so I can kind of do my own
Hmm.
production because I can't get to the studio because they won't let me go to the studio. Uh, and they can't do live performances, so they're doing a lot of compositions. So I've talked to a lot of bands that had projects that suddenly, okay, I'm not touring, so I'm actually going to work on another project.
Hmm.
So did you find that you were focusing more on writing than doing anything like in terms of performance or playing out anywhere?
Yeah, I've done some Facebook live performances, but I felt like this was a time for me to just think about and just focus on the stuff that I was actually writing and producing. And I actually had the time to go into a lot of detail, I think.
Yeah, because I mean that's what I've heard. I've done a lot of Twitch and Facebook Live stuff,
Hmm.
and I finally got a booking agent in the middle of a pandemic. um, and so I finally got an international booker that could actually get me into shows, and there's no shows to go to. But they actually called me and told me, oh, we're going to try to get you some online stuff. And I said, well, stuff that's going to pay. And they said, yeah. They said, okay, well, that's cool. So we're waiting to hear. But yeah, I finally have a booker. I might be able to, you know,
Oh.
get across the pond someday and actually travel to Asia and do other shows. But like things are so bad in the U.S. right now, they won't let us out. So even if I wanted to go somewhere, I can't get into the EU at all because they just banned us. So I'm like, oh great. So I guess I'm going to be recording more. But yeah, it's just interesting. People have taken this crisis to kind of focus on their art. Most of the people I've talked to in the last 2 months have spent a
Hmm.
lot of time on their craft. So have you, you know, I know there's like a stressful time for some people, it's just like really freaking them out. um, but some people have been able to kind of like find a safe space and continue their art. So do you feel like you've been able to be very productive in this time?
Yeah, I think so. I've just been trying to keep busy in a way and keep entertained. So just focusing on the music and focusing on art, it has been a great distraction, I think.
Yeah, I think for people who are creative, I think we're in a better spot than people like I've talked to athletes and it's really kind of freaking them
Hmm.
out because like that their whole business is they have to be out, right?
Yeah.
And they're having a hard time kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do. Some of them have actually gone and become involved in social movements and found ways
Hmm.
to do things with charity. So now they've kind of redirected their energy. But other
Hmm.
people like they find it hard if they can't be in places with other people
Yeah.
to be if they're not a creative person. They're more of a person that doesn't create, but they're just a social person. They've had a lot of
Hmm.
stress in this time. um, which I can understand. But being a creative, I just have taken it, and like a lot of the other creatives I've talked to, they've been able to find a way to navigate this.
Yeah. Because I think that's the way a lot of creative people deal with stress in their lives. You just create more.
Yeah, we just like double down on the process. I mean, I started getting into polyrhythmic processing because like I saw this Moog I wanted that I can't afford. And I said, well, can I get my current gear to do the same thing
Hmm.
with like subdivisions and polyphonic subharmonics? And he's like, "Whoa, this great new Moog came out, but I can't afford it. But can I get my current gear to do the same thing?" and I started digging into it, and I said, oh, I can actually create these polyrhythmic subdivisions and subharmonics with the stuff I already have. So I started spending time doing that, and I got down the rabbit hole, and I got stuck there. But that's one cool thing about synthesis is like you can get distracted in the machines, like the ghost in the machine. It's kind of why I'm named fan of like ghost, because I get caught up in that. But I find that like electronic music really gives you a lot of power because I can just pretty much do anything I
Yeah.
set my mind to. So do you find the fact that you're in these DAWs and you have all these soft synths, you have so much, if you're like an artist, you have a big palette, a sonic palette, you can like pretty much do anything. If you
Yeah,
can get to
definitely.
anything you want, and so you're not really, oh, I got to get to this studio because they've got a Moog or they've got a Prophet 5 or they've got this piano I want to get, when you can actually get a lot of the tones you want off of your
Mhm.
laptop.
Yeah, and also in a way, I find having so much variety can be a bit overwhelming. So it's actually good to sometimes try and set a certain limit maybe and try, oh, what can I do with just this? And I think that's a very great creative exercise. I've been doing that, especially with orchestral music. I'm just focusing on like orchestral instruments, or like maybe I will add one more extra instrument or one synth and then try and see what I can do. So just
So are you primarily focused on strings, or are you bringing in winds, or are you mostly focused on the strings?
so with Getting Over You, because it was the first orchestral thing I was doing, I did go a bit all out. So that song actually has violin, viola, cello, and upright bass in the string section, and it also has a celesta, harp, obviously drums, a French horn, tuba, and even some trumpets. So
Wow, you went
it was
all out. You
just
got the whole experience. How long did it take you to like coordinate all those parts?
quite a while, especially because I was still learning. And I think it was actually good that I did all of that in my first song because it really gave me a lot of experience trying out new things.
Yeah, it's interesting because I started as a clarinet player. I started on winds. I started in clarinets, and then I got to alto and baritone, and then I found I couldn't write like music with just winds and
Mhm.
horns. So I went to learn piano and keyboard, and then I took that knowledge of knowing how to do a wind and kind of incorporated how I do things. So I have a little bit of like a clarinet player in my sound, but but yeah, I've always looked at wind controllers to kind of bring that into my music sometimes.
Mhm.
Use like MIDI wind controllers, and then because I know how to play a clarinet, I could
Yeah.
actually play it better on that controller than actually the keyboard, because I could bring some of that feel to the music.
Mhm.
And it's always interesting. Like sometimes you want to give yourself a limitation. It's like, well, maybe I wouldn't play it on the wind controller because I want to do it on the keyboard and see if I can do something that maybe can't be done on the keyboard, but maybe it limits me and makes me do it a different way.
Yeah.
So I think it's always like sometimes you put one hand behind your back just to try to see if it changes the sound. Um, and I think musicians will do that all the time. They'll try to challenge themselves, like, oh, I'll do this in a different scale. I'll make my own scale, or I'll change it to a polyrhythm, make it more complicated, make it dissonant, make it this and that. You find different ways to kind of challenge what is ever needed to service the song.
Yeah. And like for me at least, it's my song, so I can essentially try it, and if I don't like it, I can just take it away.
Yeah.
So that's really been fun.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about being a producer, like a singer songwriter, is like, okay, well, you got this palette, and you don't have to be like, if you're working in a band, and you bring it to like the three other people in the band, and they can vote you out like right away. 'Cause I've been in bands like, okay, I'll try this, and I'll bring this, and they got three guys vote, and they're like, no, that's not going, and then okay, but when you're doing it yourself, you say, okay, well, you kind of, it's even more of a challenge because then you say, well, you got to be self-critical you
Yeah.
got to figure out what's going to work and what doesn't work. You can't just throw it all in. And so, you kind of like, oh, well, you kind of think, well, would my bass player, would he have liked that? Does it really work? Would my drummer have
Mhm.
thought that this was the right kind of drum part? At least having worked with other people, I can kind of be a little more self-critical because I know what those guys would have done. But then sometimes I say, well, I don't really care what they wanted. I'm going to do it my way. So have you worked? I think I asked you before. Have you worked with other people in collaboration? Are you starting to work with anybody in collaboration besides your producer?
I have done a collab recently called Deo, and it was with Insidian. He did a lot of the producing part of it, and it's been quite fun, I think, because it's really interesting seeing what other people bring to it, seeing what they say about it, and it just brings a new perspective.
Yeah. So like when you have that kind of back and forth with somebody else,
Yeah.
it's really cool because like I've worked on things where I thought rhythmically I could change something, and then somebody else said, well, they liked it the way it was, and I thought it was like, well,
Hmm.
it's not perfect, and they came back and said, well, I like the fact that it's a little quirky and it's a little off, and
Hmm.
trying to fix it would actually ruin it. And so this kind of thing, sometimes there's things like when you're a musician, there's point in time things, like you can go and do 10 takes and you find out like the third take is the best one,
Yeah.
and doing 10 more isn't going to really fix it, the fact that the third one is the one.
Hmm.
And it's your producers or your collaborators can kind of help with that sometimes and say, hey, it's sometimes like you just can't keep on beating the dead horse. It's like sometimes what you get when you originally had that idea is like the
Hmm.
freshest and maybe the most honest idea, piece of music, and everything from there starts to degrade.
Yeah.
It becomes like a Xerox. It's not as good as the original. um, so like, yeah, I'm very excited that you're doing this music, and we've got like this new hope project that we have. If do you call this project with these four parts? Does it have a overall project name, or each song, like you said, is independent? Do you have a term for it for in your own mind or your own work? How you label these set of songs?
So this group, I call it This Is What Poets Write About. And it actually comes from an old diary entry I found when I was looking through the times that I wrote these songs. And was where it came from, that line is because I would always come across poems and songs about this kind of love and heartbreak, and people have been writing about this all throughout history, and they will still be writing about it in the future. And I realized that at that moment, it was for the first time I understood what these were about and what these feelings were about. So that's why I titled it This Is What Poets Write About.
That's cool, because like I think a lot of singer songwriters, if you talk to them, they started as poets, and then the poems
Mm-hmm.
kind of transformed into songs. And a lot of artists, a lot of singer songwriters, they'll have diaries or journals, and you go
Mm-hmm.
back and you look at their journals. I read a lot of music history, and you'll see like these little snippets of projects coming out of their journals, coming out of their diaries. They end up becoming the song lyrics in some in the songs, and you actually see them. They wrote on napkins, they wrote on index cards, they wrote on the back of menus, or they have it in
Mm-hmm.
journals, and you see the pieces of the complete thought that became the song.
Yeah.
Do you I think we talked about it before, but like a lot of your work comes from that, right? That type of process.
Yeah, because I keep a diary, and so whenever I think of something, or if I'm going through something particular that I'm trying to understand, I just write all about it in the diary. And sometimes there are these lines that just transform themselves later on into song lyrics and another project. And it's really fun to see where they came from.
Yeah, I think like a lot of artists in the way that like a musician will have like a big reference library. Because what I've been doing is I build up like these like sessions, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll put down a bunch of stuff for like an hour and put it all on tape, right? And then same thing with my journal. I'll be writing stuff in my journal, and it's like, so then I'll go back, hit the replay, and say, well, hey, 10 minutes into this thing, I found a groove, and then
Mm-hmm.
5 pages into my journal, I found the words that actually go with that groove.
Yeah.
And you just kind of then you start pasting it back together or taking it, here and there, and then you find the songs. And that's, I think that's always been the kind of like puzzle. Or sometimes it just happens. And sometimes I've just done stream of consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
open the mic while I'm playing, and then that ends up becoming, hey, that actually works, and then I'm gonna work on that. But a lot of it will be, first or second take as stream of consciousness stuff becomes the project, and because
Yeah.
like as an artist, you have all this stuff kind of going through your mind on a reel, like your mind reel, and it's like there. And if you're a musician or a creative, you access it, and you might have been thinking about something for like 2 weeks, or a month, or whatever, or that same day, and it suddenly you hit the notes, and suddenly those words get recalled by your memory, and you boom, the muse just
Mm-hmm.
created something. Um, so I think that's just the process of creativity.
Yeah, and
It-
especially what you're saying about stream of consciousness. And I find that I do that sometimes when I'm writing, especially with Getting Over You. I just opened a page and I just started writing how I felt, and most of it made it into the song. I think it's because when you're just writing it on the moment, that's actually the truest words that you will say, the
yeah,
truest emotion
you're
that
not
you have.
self-editing. Like if you get in
Yeah.
front of somebody, and it's kind of like when the singer-songwriters, like, we like having our time, our kind of quiet time, but it's really not quiet, it's like creative time.
Mm.
and and we can use that kind of, like, some people would say, well, I'm bored because there's nothing going on, but we can take that time, and then we can be honest with ourselves. And if
Yeah.
when you're a singer-songwriter, I think the key is the better, the more honest you are, and you're not really hiding anything, that your work reflects something that everybody can understand, because we're able to tap into stuff that a lot of people don't want to tap into. They try to
Hmm.
bury it. They try to hide it. They try to, like, act like it's not there. And what people appreciate from singer songwriters is that they tap into that, and then they put it out there, and then, wow, I wish I could have said that, but they can feel it. So your audience can feel that. They then maybe can't ever write it that way, but they can appreciate when somebody else does.
Mm.
So I just, yeah, I think that's just why people get drawn into that type of art. Why I've always been focused on talking to singer songwriters.
Yeah. Because I find actually just letting it out, maybe writing it out, or talking about it to someone is actually the best way of dealing with anything.
Yeah, and then you're able to kind of use the whole world as a sounding board. Yeah, like singer songwriters, musicians, we kind of like, okay, we're having a psychotherapy, like a sound therapy, because we kind of spill our hearts out to the world, and kind of open book, and that is a catharsis, because you get it out, and then people can react to it, and then you get some songwriters who will try to, like, back away from it. Cause I saw a famous, like, Dylan interview, and they were asking him about his, like, politics in the '60s, and how he
Hmm.
was very, very liberal and very, politically on the cutting edge of, like, civil rights. And then when they asked about it when he was in his '60s, he was trying to, like, deny it. He was trying to, like, hide from it. He was trying to act like, oh, that was just words, but it didn't seem like that at the time. So it seems like, so sometimes, like, you can be so honest, and later in life you get like, oh, well, I kind of want to back away from that. Um, but it was interesting to see him kind of cringing and backing away from his more liberal politics, because he had become, more conservative as he got older. And it's interesting to see that, in a singer songwriter. It's like, okay, well, sometimes that can kind of burn you, I guess, if you didn't realize that you were going to change. um, yeah, I think it's just interesting to read, into people's art, what they're doing.
Mm.
So what's next after the four songs are fully out there? Do you have other things you're working on?
Yes, I actually have two more songs that are not part of the series that I've finished recently. So I'm just planning way ahead.
So are you gonna dive more into online, like Facebook, Twitch, things out there that online performances, or focus more on being creative, doubling down on creating more projects, or try to get this stuff out in like video form or live performance form in the ways that we can't do it because of COVID?
Yeah, I think at the moment, a lot of what I've been focusing on has been producing the music, but I'm definitely gonna be, I think after these songs are out, definitely gonna be doing a lot more live streams or performance videos.
So with the orchestral, if you were going to do a live performance, would you include the orchestral backing tracks, or do them more unplugged, or is the whole point where you'd want to do it with the full? If you had live perform it on a Facebook or a Twitch or something, would you do the whole piece, or do you
I
decide to
think
present it in a different way?
I think if I did like a live performance on Facebook, I would do it with just the guitar because I feel like in a way it's like when I'm listening to music, I like hearing produced versions, but also when I watch performances, I actually really like the acoustic versions of it because it's something new.
Yeah, it's not the same as the studio version.
Yeah.
I always like a band that will go out and play their hit, and it doesn't sound like the album. Where I think
Mm.
today that maybe is not the trend, but growing up in the 70s and the 80s, the whole point of seeing the live act was like I didn't want to hear like Prince play everything on 1999 the way it was on the record. I like the fact that he would change it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, or even Springsteen, like the songs that didn't sound exactly at the way they were recorded. Right, I used to go see the Dead or Parliament Funkadelic, and the fact that the bands would actually go off on a tangent, it was
Mm.
something what we wanted to see, what we wanted to hear. Um, and so that was, it seems like today that's kind of changed, where people, at least with popular music, they want to hear it like, so somebody just goes out with a sequencer and then hits the play button. And then you kind of are playing karaoke with your own music. Um, Not that that's bad, but it's not what I grew up with.
Mm.
So I do appreciate it when somebody does like an unplugged performance and it's not exactly what was on the record, and they even might change the lyrics based on the way they feel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you can always listen to it as it is on the record, but when you're watching a live performance, it's more fun to see what it is at that moment in time.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's this famous like a Dylan example is like during like his concerts where he had a lot of things from Blood on the Tracks. He had multiple versions of like Tangled Up in Blue and Idiot Wind, and he would go on stage and have whole verses that weren't on the record. And if you go on
Mm.
the live, history of Dylan, there are multiple versions of those songs that have whole different sections. That
Oh
whole,
wow.
that he decides in certain concerts, okay, well, I didn't put that on the record, but I'm going to do it here, and have a totally different section, totally different lyrics, and you're like, that was kind of like the draw. Oh, which version is he going to do? And that was because I was like, I'm a deep Dylan guy. I'll listen to every little word he's saying and get drawn into it. But I was like, wow, that's not the same as what he did in
Yeah.
'76, and what he's in '74 is not the same. They're different versions. Um, and they even have the bands play it differently. Some bands would play it with like slide blues guitars. Some play with heavy rock guitars. Some play it more
Mm.
countrified, more like the band. And every time you saw it, it's like a different version of Dylan's presentation. Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's always drawn me into like when artists will go and do a different version of their own music, and I actually will go back and collect all the variations. Um, yeah, so that's cool that you're going to be doing that. I think that's really what people want to see. You know, like Kurt Cobain, like when he was on MTV Unplugged, and he did that acoustic version, and he was this big grunge kind of post-punk rocker, and he came there
Mm-hmm.
unplugged, and that was so honest, and people thought, well, like, wow, that people I think got an appreciation where they thought that he was a deeper musician than they thought
Yeah.
initially, you know, because of his ability to convey that. I think if you can convey it with less going on, you know, if you don't have all
Mm-hmm.
that armor around you, the sonic armor of your band, to kind of protect you, if you can show that in a delicate situation where you're just with an acoustic instrument, I
Yeah,
think people can hear you in a different way.
yeah, definitely, especially because I wrote these songs with just a guitar. So it's a bit more like being in a conversation with the person when you're just performing it with the guitar without the whole protection in a way of the orchestra.
Yeah, yeah, that's always like the really sign of a musician that feels comfortable when they can be that in that unplugged kind of zone and carry it off. And you're like, wow, there's no studio tricks here. Here's the real deal. So we're very happy we have you back on the show, Regina Fae. Everybody should go out on July 3rd and getting over you. It will be on
Yes.
all the media streaming services. We've got the Spotify link on this podcast link set up for it. And go out and listen to part one, Lie to You, which is out right now on all streaming services, but includes Spotify because we're on Spotify. So yeah, we're glad to talk to you again. I hope you stay safe in this kind of trying period. We're very happy that you're still pushing your creativity, and that we love to see that. And very excited you're still putting out new projects. So that I'm very happy for what you're doing, and we wish you great success on your new project.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.